Hi there. Welcome back to the Out of the Cave podcast with Lisa Schlossberg. I'm your host, Lisa Schlossberg, a licensed social worker, certified health coach, personal trainer, and yoga instructor. If you, like I have, struggle with your relationship with food, eating, and body image, I am here with this podcast to guide you into healing the relationship you have with yourself through a trauma-informed, holistic, and mind-body-soul approach. Together, we can support you in building a lifestyle of more peace, freedom, safety, and power. Hello, and welcome back again to the Out of the Cave podcast. This is me, Lisa Schlossberg, your host. Very excited to be back here today to continue the conversation and give you another peek inside my brain. So as always, thank you for being here. Thank you for showing back up. And I guess as usual now, I just kind of want to dive right in. I'm so used to starting my group coaching calls and thinking about the announcements and the reminders and the things to check back in on. But with this, we get to just dive right in. So let's do it. So we are now entering what I am calling chapter 5 of these thoughts. And I honestly think that this entire episode will also be potentially an hour or so of follow-up thoughts, because as I'm laying all of this out, I'm realizing, okay, so the curriculum that I teach through my coaching program is in total probably about 40 something hours of video content of me speaking. So as I want to, and I keep saying this, dive in, I want to get into the integration of the fear, self-compassion, and that's module 12 of 12. And so what I'm realizing is that even though I want to get there and I feel impatient with my own follow-up thoughts, it does still feel like all of this matters as part of the groundwork before we get to what it all looks like in integration. We have to know more about how the system is operating. So that's what I'm going to do today is I kind of had all these thoughts come to me after the last episode of well, we also need to talk about that, and we also should probably say this. So that's what we're going to do. And I also, just because, I don't know, it's my podcast, I can say what I want at this point. I want to share openly, transparently, that part of the reason that I am recording this today is because I don't feel like it. Or not, it's not that simple, right? It's not that I don't feel like it. I'm actually here because I do want to do this. But in this present moment, I am wiped. I'm exhausted. I feel really, really tired from my weekend. I'm recording this on a Monday afternoon, which I would not choose to do usually. But anyway, I feel as though, you know what it reminds me of is when you finish, when you finish eating and you're like, oh, I'm so full, I'm so stuffed, I couldn't possibly eat another morsel of food. And then someone hands you a dessert menu and it's well, I could, because there's, dessert has its own stomach, as we like to say. And so it feels actually like that, where I have no energy at all for things I don't want to do right now. But then there's it's just life force driving this bus, and it literally I'm not kidding, but the reason I'm saying this is because it's so aligned and on brand with everything I've been talking about, where I literally feel someone, there's almost I don't want to say a puppeteer. It doesn't feel as though I have no free will or agency. That's not the vibe. But it does feel a little bit like some force is guiding me, and I'm almost watching myself sit down, open up my notes, hit record, and now I'm here. I'm doing it, and something's driving the bus. So that's me right now. That's me right now. Okay, so that's my little intro for today. I am showing up imperfectly because I'm learning in real time that, it just doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if I'm tired, if there's resistance, if there's other this is what matters. So that's me. Here's to messy action. Here's to imperfect, important conversations. Okay, now that I've said that, the other I want to say like unrelated thought that I had throughout the week was about Gary V. Gary Vaynerchuk. You don't have to know anything about Gary V, and it's totally okay if you don't and never do. He's big in the world of like business and entrepreneurship. So, especially when I was first starting out and as a business owner and shifting into the identity of business owner, entrepreneur, and things like that, I would listen to some of his speeches. And I think that he has so much to offer, and what he's saying is so incredibly valuable. And there's so much I could say about Gary Vee and how much I love him, but he can be very polarizing. Like some people really, really, really don't like him. And some people have a really hard time listening to him because he can sound what fascinates me about Gary Vee, and we might actually come back to this in the conversation of like masculine and feminine balance and energy, is like he can come off very masculine, abrasive, arrogant, things like that. He's intense. He's really intense. But what I love about him, he's like this walking paradox because that's how he delivers what he's saying. But what he's always talking about is empathy and love and compassion. And okay, so anyway, so again, I'm not going to make this like a whole thing about Gary Vee because I could. But the reason I was thinking about him is because he curses a lot. He curses a lot. And sometimes people have a problem with that, or they question him about that, or they confront him about that. Like, why do you have to curse so much? I would love what you have to say, but you curse way too much. Or I want to share you with my children, but you are always cursing and it's a problem for me or whatever. And so I've heard him talk about it a few times where he talks about how he needs to be able to show up authentically. He needs to be able to say what he wants to say the way that he needs to say it in a way that is the most aligned and resonant and true and authentic for him. And he can't do what he does if he has to constantly be censoring and filtering himself all the time. And so I was thinking about, I'm like listening to all these episodes and I'm like, I want to acknowledge that, yeah, these are explicit episodes. I've probably dropped an F-bomb in at least every single one of the last few, and I'm okay with that. But I guess there is a part of me that wants to acknowledge that that's another way that I feel as though I'm practicing authenticity and just speaking the way that feels true. Because especially when I'm here and I'm sitting down and I'm recording, it's not the time and place for me to be censoring and filtering myself if what I'm trying to do is speak authentically and teach in a way that, my heart and soul are in this. And so it doesn't feel, at least right now, in this chapter of my life today, it could change. It doesn't feel like that's something that I want to practice, is censoring and filtering certain words out. So part of it is, I don't know, I just wanted to acknowledge that. And I'm not going to apologize for that. It's hard not to apologize for that because, well, anyway, that's why I'm acknowledging it. That if you are someone who like really doesn't enjoy that, that's super valid. And that's what I will say to that. Like, your feelings about it are valid, whatever they are. But you know what? She's a New Yorker and she's back in New York. And I overhear, this is one of my favorite things about being back in New York. I overhear the word fuck every single day. That's what it feels like. Like just walking down the street, other people's phone calls, other people having conversations, like wherever. And it's just so natural. So I think there's also like the cultural element of just like, I'm just back in New York, baby. I live in Brooklyn now. This is just, I don't know. I don't want to turn it off. I can't turn it off. So I'm acknowledging that. And we're going to go with it. We're just going to go with it. All right. So that's Gary Vee and cursing. Now, moving on to my actual follow-up thoughts, the content. I want to say a couple things about radical acceptance and the embodiment of acceptance and surrender, things that, again, we've kind of been building on. one of the things that I keep thinking about is I think very often want to practice acceptance and surrender to, let's say, a specific situation or a specific feeling or a specific struggle or things like that. And that all matters. And what I have found is that there's something that gets in the way of being able to practice acceptance of an emotion, let's say, of sadness or anxiety or anger or any loneliness, boredom, whatever it is that we are working with that we're trying to practice acceptance. What I've noticed is that first we need to start with, again, if you're anything like me and you are coming from a history of quote unquote just not feeling things or feeling like too strong to get into your vulnerability and things like that, I think the first thing that has to happen is there needs to be an acceptance and ultimately a surrendering to your nature in a general sense. And what I mean by that is a surrendering to the fact that you're a spiritual being having a physical experience with an animal brain in a social context surviving on food. So surrendering to that can very often, like I said in previous episodes, look like, oh, I do have feelings. That is part of what it is to be human. It is sometimes messy. It does sometimes hurt. Sometimes I get my heart broken. That's what it is to be human. And I find that if we are not already in acceptance or surrender to the fact that this is what it is to be human, that's the first layer. Because again, what usually tends to happen, I see this visually in my head, is like, I guess the diagram that I'm thinking of is like the layers of the earth. Is that a thing? It's got to be. I'm seeing it like it's like from earth science or something. There's like the core of the earth, like planet Earth, and then there's, like layers. And the reason I guess my brain is going to that visual is because it's like, if you're trying to go straight to a specific feeling and practice acceptance of that, you're missing the layer of having feelings and being in acceptance of that. And so I also am putting it this way because if you're like me, you can start with just a general acceptance of the fact that it's normal to be emotional. To be emotional is to be human. To have emotions, to feel energy, that's just part of the gig. And you can just start practicing acceptance of that. And then once you get kind of comfortable there, then when your sadness comes up and your fear comes up and all these emotions actually come up looking for and wanting acceptance, you're not judging yourself for having them because you've already moved through that. You're not shaming yourself for having them. You're not being that first layer that ends up being an obstacle to actually practicing surrender and acceptance. So I think that's important to name because, again, very often people are wondering why they're getting stuck in the acceptance practice around a certain feeling. And it's like, well, you still think that you're fundamentally broken for having a feeling in the first place. You still think there's something wrong with you, that you're suffering at all. And there isn't. So we need to start there. So, all right. So that's my first thought about acceptance and surrender. But the other thing I wanted to say about radical acceptance, this came up in my group last week, and really hear me when I say this. In order to accept what is, we have to grieve what isn't. In order to accept what is, we have to grieve what isn't. So I'm actually surprised that I talked so much about acceptance and I didn't talk about grief, because to me, they always go hand in hand and I think about them that way. So if we look at, okay, so there's stages of grief. And some people say that there's 7. Some people, usually it's talked about in 5. And they're not linear. This isn't like you move through, you plug it into a formula and you go through grief this way. That's not how it works. But for the sake of the conversation regarding acceptance, it's important to know the stages of acceptance are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and then acceptance. So for me, when we talk about radically accept, be where you are right now, be in your body as it is right now, and bring in the energy of safety to that. Well, in order for you to actually accept what is, acceptance is the last stage. Acceptance is the final stage of grief. So if we want to actually accept what is, to me, we have to grieve what isn't. And again, I think that's really important, because if you're trying to practice acceptance and you feel like it's so elusive and you can't actually get there, and you're not accessing the inner peace and tranquility that can come from that embodiment practice, I think it's important to consider, have you moved through any of the stages of grief? Have you done any grieving around the fact that the situation is not what you want it to be, and you don't feel how you want to feel, and it didn't go the way you wanted it to go? In order to accept what is, we have to grieve what isn't. And I had this moment yesterday, I think, where I have been, and I have said this for like years at this point, that I need to do an entire episode on coffee and caffeine, because there's so much around that. But I'm not going to get too derailed. But I have been currently, really looking at and trying to work on my relationship with coffee and caffeine. And I've been all over with this substance. I have practiced abstinence before. I have lived without it for months at a time. And now I am kind of back in it, and I've been navigating, and I've been kind of pulling back a little bit. So anyway, I was thinking about, I was on my walk, and I had 1 cup of coffee in the morning with my breakfast, and that was good. All right, cool. Then I went for a walk, and there was a part of me that really wanted to go get more coffee. And there's also a part of me that has been working to really notice where it's coming from. It's very much like food. Is this a physical thing? Is this an emotional thing? Like, what exactly are we looking for? But I've also been trying lovingly to gently abstain and practice restraint. And so I had this moment where I really wanted to get the coffee, and I knew, and I decided that I wasn't going to end up doing that. And there was a part of me that felt really relieved and grateful and proud that I was listening to my body and really attuning to what I know to be true, which is I did not need more caffeine. I wanted dopamine. I wanted happy chemicals. I was trying to solve an emotional problem with a physical solution, ultimately, by using coffee to serve that purpose. And so anyway, I decided I wasn't going to do it. And then I went through this internal dialogue that I've heard many times from my clients around food, where it's almost like there was a part of me that was really sad and grieving, not just the second cup of coffee, but really grieving that there was a voice in my head that said things like, this is so unfair. Other people can have as much coffee as they want and not feel really anxious or have a stomach ache or have all the digestive issues. Like it's not fair because other people can do it and I can't. And let's talk about this for a second, because this is so clearly, I hope, not about the coffee. It's not about the food. It's about life is not fair and I don't get everything I want all the time. If I'm staying connected to my body, if I'm honoring my body, if I'm respecting myself, there are things that I have to grieve along the way. And this shows up in relationships all the time, where it's like, if I'm telling the truth about how I feel, this relationship isn't really going to work for me. Or if I'm telling the truth about how I feel, I really don't like, the way that I feel when I'm with this person or something like that. And so if you're being true to yourself and honoring yourself, there are things that we have to grieve along the way. And it's not just about accept it along the way. I think in order to accept it, we really have to give ourselves the time and space to grieve what isn't. And so when I heard this part of me that was like, this is so unfair. What about other people? I just want to be one of those people. I hear this stuff all the time when it comes to food, right? I just want to be a normal person that just eats. And so I pay attention to this because I'm like, wow, I have this whole story about what other people's relationship with coffee and caffeine is like. I actually don't, I don't know. I don't know. But what I want to say is like, even to the part of me that was saying that, like very inner child, kind of temper tantrumy, but not the energy of like screaming and crying, just really bummed out. Like, this isn't fair. There's a part of me that wants to be like, I don't even know if that's true. I don't know. I'm making assumptions that other people have that relationship with coffee. I don't know what's true for other people and their relationship with coffee and their digestion and all of the things. I don't know. But the reason I say that is because it reminds me very much of food and eating, where people are like, I want to be like that person who never thinks about food. And it's like, you don't know that that person never thinks about food. And a lot of the time, the people that we're looking at being like, I want to look like her. I want to live like her. I want to be just like her. She has not got the inner peace that you think she does, that you are making up in your head that she does. And so that was in my awareness of like, oh, here I am making assumptions about what I think I know about other people, but that is not it. So there's that part. But I think the important thing about this to actually practice when you're moving through your own stages of grief in order to arrive at acceptance is to validate it, is to simply validate it. And I think part of the reason that we don't do this and what gets in the way, this is a moment of tender self-compassion. I think what gets in the way of it is that we tend to do this thing that's like, oh, please, it's just a snack. Get over it. It's not that serious. Or I could have done this myself. Oh my God, it's just a cup of coffee. Why are you whining about this? Please get over it. It's not that big a deal. But the whole point is it's not about the coffee and it's not about the food. It's about what's going on internally around it. And so when my inner child comes up and says, this isn't fair, I don't want it to work this way. I want to be able to have as much coffee as I want and be fine with it. I did what I knew I had to do, which was identify this is step one of tender self-compassion. This is a moment of suffering. This is a moment of suffering. I'm sad. I'm feeling grief. Life is not fair. I don't get to have everything I want all the time. I have to live in this human situation where one part of me is dying to have another cup of coffee and another part of me is fighting really hard to make sure I don't do that. This is hard. This is hard. That's the first step of tender self-compassion, is validating it and being aware of it. And so the conversation that I had with this inner child part of me really was like, I know it's not fair. You're right. It's not fair. And, and then she goes on and she's like, well, other people can have all the coffee. Other people can have all the shots of espresso. All the other people, they can do what they want. And it's so not fair, because if I want to listen to my body, then that means that I can have one cup of coffee and that's pretty much it. And all I did was really, I see you. I hear you. I know. I agree. This sucks. This sucks. Can we let it suck? Can we just let it suck? And I think that's the biggest lesson that I've learned from grief, the grief that I've experienced in my life. The lesson for me very often around grief is let it suck, because there's nothing to do. There's usually very much or very little to do, quote unquote, when it comes to your feelings, because we're not trying to get rid of them. We're trying to move through them and let them be here. But with grief especially, it's like there's nothing to do. And sometimes it's just let it suck. And so I had that opportunity. And then that is what brought all this back to my mind, was like, in me knowing how to go through that, in me saying, I surrender to the fact that I'm a human being and sometimes it's emotional for things that feel really minor. And I know how to practice tender self-compassion, to acknowledge, be mindful of, and validate my feelings and my expression of those feelings. And then it allowed me to be in this place of like, okay. And that's the energy of acceptance. Okay. So that's what usually happens. And that's why I said earlier, you don't have to like it. You don't have to want it. You don't have to agree with it or approve of it, all of those things. But you might find that as you are identifying how much you don't like the situation, you might feel as though, all of that anger or that kind of like resistant energy is you not accepting it. And what I want to say is I think that it's very valid to frame that as you're on your way to acceptance being the final stage of grief. So if you have to grieve that your life doesn't look the way you want it to, that someone didn't behave the way you wanted them to, that you are not treated the way you want to be treated by someone that you love, or whatever it is, if you have to grieve what is not, and part of that is being angry, and part of that is depression, and part of that is bargaining. If you need to go through the stages of grief for you to arrive at acceptance, that's valid and that's very important. Now, I hope all of that makes sense so far. And I just want to tell you a story because I know I keep saying like we're going to talk all about the intentional weight loss, and we really, really are. But to give you kind of I don't know, maybe a sneak peek or something, I keep thinking about the moment that I had way before, back in the day, before my weight loss, because I would never have used these words at the time. Radical acceptance is not something I would know about. There was no sense of spirituality. I definitely was not thinking about surrender. None of this was on my radar. I was thinking about how do I lose weight. But in hindsight, I think about this moment a lot because I know that what actually happened there was this was my moment of surrender, and it was the moment that everything changed for me. And so what it was I had just gone to Jenny Craig again. I was starting at roughly 300 pounds. And I remember going back to, now I was back in Michigan after, okay, so let me back up, just give you the context, the details of how this went. The first time I went to Jenny Craig ever, I was in New Zealand on my gap year. I graduated high school in 3 years, and instead of my fourth year of high school, I took a gap year and I was traveling. And the first time that I went to Jenny Craig, it was when I was living alone in New Zealand, and I was 302 pounds, and that's where it all began. And then after that, I went to college for a year, and I just like kind of abandoned the whole thing. I was like, I have too much stuff to do. I'm not doing Jenny Craig my freshman year of college. And I kind of went back to being mostly mindless around food. And then the following summer, after my freshman year of college, I went on birthright to Israel for about 2 weeks, and then I came home, and that is when I went back to Jenny Craig and kind of hit the ground running, and then that turned into 150-pound weight loss. So I had just gone back to Jenny Craig in Michigan, and I was like starting up again. And I had at this point, I had a few months of experience doing Jenny Craig. I saw that, the first time before I went to college, I probably lost like 30 pounds or something. And so I had at this point, I knew that I like could do it. And I knew that it was something that I had done and then kind of gave up. And now I felt really serious about getting back to it. And so I went to Jenny Craig and I weighed in again. I was probably like 290 something or 285 or I don't know, something like that. And I remember getting back to the apartment and putting all the food away. And the moment that I want to tell you about is when I was pacing. I was pacing like in circles. I was walking back and forth in the apartment that I was living in. And I remember it's almost like the same kind of energy that I experienced when I started meditating years later, crawling out of my skin. Like I don't even know how else to explain it. It felt like I was crawling in my skin. I wanted to like rip myself out of my own body. It was so uncomfortable because what was going through my head and what I remember so well was all the calculations. There was a lot going on around how fast. I remember I kept calculating. It's like, when you look in the fridge and you look at all the food in the fridge and you're like, well, I don't want to eat any of that. And then you walk away and then you come back and you open the fridge again as though there's going to be different food in there. I remember doing the same thing with like the calculator. If I could lose X amount of pounds, a week for X amount of weeks, how long will it take to get this weight off my body? And no matter what, and I kept punching in the same numbers and getting the same answers and being like, no, like that. And I was in this like resistance and ultimately fear. It was fear. It was like, no, this is going to take forever. I have half my body size to lose. I was over 50% body fat. And I remember pacing around like, what am I going to do? Get me out of here. Like, I got to get out of here. I can't. And it was this reckoning with reality. And so there was this part of it was, what am I going to do? I can't believe this is what it is. How long will it take? How fast can I do it? Like looking for the exit from my own body. And then a lot of it was also looking back. And it wasn't necessarily even regret, but it was just this questioning and reflecting on everything that I like ever ate that I didn't need to eat, all the guidance and advice from my doctors and nutritionists that I didn't follow, and all the ways that I remember thinking I did this to myself. And here's what's important about it. Number one, I don't say that like I did this to myself as though I deserve to be in pain because of it. Or I did this to myself, I'm bad, I'm ashamed. No, it was coming from like an objective truth telling, I did this. No one else did this to me. There is no one else at fault. There's no one else to blame. I wasn't necessarily even really truly blaming myself, but it was literally like the visual I get right now is like the universe just like came through, opened my eyeballs that were closed until that point, and I was just looking at it. That is, I did do this to me. I was the only one that behaved this way, that treated my body this way, that completely neglected myself. I was the one. No one else did this. And the really tough pill to swallow with that is I'm the only one that can get me out. And I knew, and so I'm telling you this because I'm pacing, like trying to find a way out. And that to me was the stages of grief. I was angry. I was depressed. I was bargaining. Like literally, if I could go back in time and I just did this and I could have done that. And it's like, it's grief. It's the stages of grief. And then ultimately I'm like fighting through this. And I arrive at this place of acceptance. That is, we're here now. That's it. You're here now. There's nothing that you can go back and do differently. You can't change the past. You are where you are. And I remember thinking to myself, like, I am the only one that can get me out of this. And I have to get me out of this. And so it was acceptance. It was surrender. It was, okay, it'll take a long time. Okay, it'll take a long time. Okay, I'm going to have to be really uncomfortable. Okay, I'm going to have to change my lifestyle. I'm going to have to change what I'm willing to show up for. I'm going to have to change the way I eat and move and everything. Okay, I surrender. I surrender. Because what choice do I have? Where else am I going to go with this? I can't blame anyone else. I can't put it on anyone else. No one is coming to do this for me, right? No one's coming to save you. No one's coming to feed you. And it was a moment of surrender. And that is why I say with so much passion when I'm talking about practicing radical acceptance of what is, radical acceptance of where you are and your body as it is right now, because I know deeply in my bones what it's like to think about being present in your body as it is and having an enormous emotional reaction to that feels energetically like fight or flight. Like, I can't be here. I can't tolerate this. I can't do this. And honestly, I don't know what got me through it. That's a God moment. That's a God moment. I would never say that to you at 17, 18 years old, but I don't know what allowed that moment of, bargaining and denial and fighting it and resisting it and trying to control it and erase it and change it into, okay, this is it. This is it. This is it. This is just what it's going to be. I don't know, but I'm telling you this because I want you to know that you can have those moments where you're like panicking and freaking out. It doesn't mean that you're not accepting. It means you're on your way to acceptance. And I just want to offer, I keep thinking about at the Omega retreat last summer. Those of you that were there, I think you will remember that it was really powerful when we were practicing this, exactly this, being in your body and feeling safe as you are. And it brought up a lot of emotion for a lot of people because it was like, it can be so hard to be here now as you are. And I don't know, I guess I just want to inspire you to move through the emotional roller coaster potentially that can come with doing that. Because if you frame it as this is the emotional roller coaster of the stages of grief to arrive at acceptance and surrender, that is the foundation for transformation. Transformation begins with the radical acceptance of what is, which is to say, now if we put it all together, right, it's like two formulas coming together. If transformation begins with a radical acceptance of what is, but you have to move through the stages of grief in order to arrive at acceptance, transformation begins with grieving what isn't. Transformation begins with grieving what isn't. So you can radically accept what is, and now we can move. So that's the framework that I want to offer. And the other story that this reminds me of is not actually my own original story. This is a John Gabriel's story. But he talks about, in his experience, he was over 400 pounds and he had, he talks about the yo-yo dieting, losing weight, gaining weight, losing weight, gaining weight, losing it, gaining it, and trying every diet under the sun. And he has a point in his story before he then goes on to lose 220 pounds where he says, after all of the yo-yo dieting, all the back and forth, all the up and down, all the diets, all of this, like there was a point where he said, okay, that's it. I'm done. I am never going to diet again. I refuse to continue fighting my body. And if I have to live every day of the rest of my life at this weight, I'm willing to do it because I can't do the fight anymore. And that, the reason he tells the story is because that was like the beginning of his weight loss, of weight just kind of naturally falling off. And he was focusing on health and the kind of food he was eating and doing some movement and things like that. But it wasn't from a place of fighting and coercion and force and control the way that all the diets were. And so when I think about my moment of like pacing around my room and just saying, okay, this is what I have to do. I'm going to do it. There's nowhere else to go. There's nowhere else to run. I can't hide. This is my body. I have to do this. I surrender to what is. I accept what is. This is what is. It's very similar and energetically to me exactly the same as John Gabriel saying, okay, if this is the weight that I have to be, fine, but I will not fight it anymore. I just will not try to control it anymore. And then the great irony is that then he started losing weight. And in that moment, for me, it was very intentional weight loss, but it also was the beginning of the whole thing. Was a moment of acceptance, a moment of surrender, a moment for John and I both to say, this is where I am right now. That's it. I'm not fighting it. I don't like it. I don't want to be here. This doesn't feel good to me. But you know what? What am I supposed to do? I can't fight it anymore. It just is what it is. And that moment where you connect with and align with yourself. I mean, ultimately, this is tender self-compassion, right? It's like, I don't want to be here. I don't like it. I'm freaking out. I'm panicking. I'm 300 pounds. And all of us, it literally felt to me like one day I woke up and I saw my body and was like, what? How? Who? Ho- mm. So I needed to process that. But all of this is saying, when you can actually be with yourself in the suffering that might arise from you being in the present moment with yourself, that's the moment that you show up. Okay? So remember, trauma is not what happened to you. Trauma is what happened inside of you. But trauma is not just what happened inside of you. Trauma is being alone in what happened. And so, if you are willing to say, I'm opening my eyes, this is where I am, I see myself, and you are willing to practice the tender self-compassion of, wow, this really hurts. I really don't like this. I don't want this. This is hard. If you can do that, now you're no longer alone. And this is the moment that you connect with and you align with yourself in the present moment. So I am convinced that any time you can actually do this, it's like a moment of a spiritual awakening. And this, I truly, truly believe is and was the beginning of my weight loss. It was a spiritual moment. I wouldn't have called it that. I didn't know that's what was happening, but that is absolutely what it felt like. So again, I think we can see, or I hope, how it all kind of comes together. There's radical acceptance, there's tender self-compassion, there's grief and the stages of grief, and like we are moving through this all the time. So if we want, again, like the peace and freedom and empowerment that we're looking for, these are the things we have to know are also A, available to us to practice, and also B, playing out whether we're conscious of it or not. Okay, so moving on. Now I want to talk to you a little bit more about control and power, because we talked about control last time. You have total responsibility and only partial control over your body and your life. Okay, so now we need to talk about what does that actually mean for you more tangibly, in a more granular sense. So what I want to clarify first, especially because we can have a tendency of some black and white thinking, especially when some of the things can be emotional or potentially there are some fears around that. Like if I'm saying you have total responsibility and partial control and that makes you feel a sense of fear or anxiety, it makes sense that then the black and white thinking would turn on. That's kind of how it works. So the good news is not having total control does not equate to you having zero control. And that's a really important distinction, because we tend, I don't love this phrase, but we tend to, quote unquote, throw the baby out with the bathwater, where if I don't have all the power, I must be powerless. So for example, like we talked about last time, ChatGPT had really smart things to say about like, you have some control over things, but you don't have control over how trauma shaped your nervous system. You don't have control over the speed of your metabolism. You don't have control over, the brain thinking that every diet you go on is a famine. You don't have control over how a lot of this works. But what tends to happen then, back to the kind of pendulum, is then people are like, well, if diets don't work, then I can't do anything. And then I'm just not going to pay attention. But what I want to put on your radar, and this is very module 8, I think about the difference between powerless and parenting. So let's go back to you are the parent to your inner child. You are essentially, you could think about your body as a child that you have to take care of and nurture and provide for and put to bed at night and provide meals for and all the things, right? Like your body slash emotional self slash inner child. That's your child. So I like thinking about parenting here because it's really helpful in regards to control and power as well. Because if you're a parent, you don't have total control over your child. You don't have total control over your child. And if you're living in the illusion that you have total control over your child, you can just consider the fact you can't control what they think. You might be hell-bent on proving to everyone that you can control what they do, but okay, you can't control what they think. You can't control how they feel. And a lot of the time, you cannot control what they do or don't do. You don't have total control over your child. Okay? And so that's an important mindset, because when it comes to parenting, you don't do the all or nothing thing. Right? You're not like, well, I can't control everything that my child does, says, thinks, and believes, so I might as well not feed them either. It's like, no, you do your part. You take care of your part of the parenting dynamic, and they also have to take care of their part. And so I think about it this way is because the reason I think about it this way is because if we swing the pendulum over to like, well, if I can't go on a diet, then I can't do anything and I'm completely powerless. If we take on that mindset, to me, the question is, who's taking care of your child? If you check out because you don't have total control, who's in charge? Who's home? Who's babysitting? Where is the adult in the room? Which is all to say, who is the source of safety? Because now, again, it's kind of like your child is left alone. And this is not all the child's job. The parent needs to be there. So instead of that way of thinking, the black and white, all or nothing way of thinking, I like to think, of course, about the inner child, inner parent dynamic, but even more so, like I include in my curriculum and at the retreat from last week, I use the visual of a horse or a human riding a horse as like a visual aid. And if you feel into that energetically, there's a relationship between rider and horse. And especially if you want your horse to be performing well, you have to treat it well. It's a two-way street. And so I think about that as well in relation to how you are with your body and with yourself, because you don't have total control, but you have some. And so we need to talk about where you have power and where you do not have power. Because if we want to eventually talk about fierce self-compassion, taking action to alleviate suffering, we have to be clear on what actions even are there for you to take and where are you going out of your lane? Where are you overdoing it? Where are you now swinging the pendulum again into kind of an old way of behaving? So that's what we have to get clear about. So you can think of it as, again, inner child, inner parent. You are the one that is responsible for showing up in some ways. Or you can think of it as like a rider and a horse and what that relationship needs to look like, sound like, feel like for both to go where they want to go. So here's some examples. Here's where you don't have power or you don't have control. If or when your body feels hungry. If or when your body feels tired. If or when your body feels thirsty. If or when you need to use the bathroom. If or when you feel scared. If or when you need support and connection. If or when you need to slow down and self-care. If or when you have cravings or compulsions. These are the things you don't have power over. This is where you don't have control. This is what it is to be human. This is just what it is to be human. Sometimes you get hungry. Sometimes you get tired. Sometimes you're thirsty. Sometimes you have to get up and pee, even though you have stuff to do. This is where you don't have control. You don't have power. You can't, there's something you could do about that. That's what it is to be in a human body. But let's go over to the other side of my chart. Module 8. Here's where you do have power. Here's where you do have control. This is where you get to show up. Whether or not you choose to eat. Okay? You can't control if your body gets hungry. You can control whether you give it food or not. You cannot control if your body gets tired. You can control if you choose to rest. You cannot control if your body gets thirsty. You can choose to hydrate or not. Okay? You see where this is going? There are a lot of things you don't have control over, but there are a lot of things you do have control over. And I always like to use the example of getting up and using the bathroom because of how frequently I especially used to find myself like feeling as though my bladder is going to legitimately burst. And I'm sitting at the computer like, I just have to finish this one line of this one email and then I'll go pee. And then what do? Open up another email and do the same thing. Excuse me. This is a really good example of just not listening to the body. Okay. So it's not just hungry and full. It's all of the needs. And a lot of them, again, we don't have control over. So I get to choose. Am I going to be the person that says, just one more sec. I'm just going to write an email. I'm going to put you through all of this discomfort, activate my own stress response just to get this email out, which, by the way, is not time sensitive at all, right? It's me with the sense of urgency projected onto the emails. And so it's on me to say, okay, I know that I have an email to write. I know that I am addicted to checking things off the list. And I know that I would get a dopamine hit if I hit the send button. And I don't have control over the fact that I have to get up and pee right now. The only thing I have control over is whether or not I choose to honor that or not. And so again, it goes back to what I was saying in a previous episode where it can feel really threatening to honor the body, especially if our habit and what we are used to and familiar with is not doing that. But this is why we have to get clear on your role ultimately. What is your role in your relationship with your body? And especially, what is your role when it comes to intentional weight loss? We are going to get there. But boy, this is really important as a foundation because especially when it comes to intentional weight loss, you have some control. You don't have all the control. And if you are still refusing to be in a dance with your body, if you are still refusing to ride the horse because you don't have total control over it, good luck with something like intentional weight loss in a safe and sustainable way. I don't know how else you could do it. So anyway, that's the point. You don't have control. Also, now let's talk about emotionally. If or when you feel scared, you don't have control over things emotionally. You're going to feel how you feel a lot of the time. You can control how you respond to your emotions, but the presence of emotion, you can't control that. But whether or not you choose to validate it, feel it, acknowledge it, you have power there. Same is true with needing support, needing to slow down, right? If you're sped all the way up all day long, your body needs to slow down. You don't have to do it, but that's what your mind-body system needs to be regulated. And if you don't do it, you'll likely find yourself doing other things like potentially eating as a way to feel safe. So this is the whole point. We have to know what we can do and what we can't do. And this is also why it's very much like parenting, because there's physical needs like when you're hungry, when you're thirsty, when you're tired, when you got to go pee. There's physical needs, and it's your job as the quote unquote parent to meet those needs, to feed your body when it's hungry, etc. But then there's also the emotional component of it. That is when you feel sad, when you feel stressed, when you feel scared, when you feel lonely. Are you also taking responsibility for those needs? So once again, I will just remind you, this is why I'm always saying we're using the relationship you have with food as the mechanism through which you learn how to reparent yourself. And we could even say, or obviously at this point probably say, we're using the journey of intentional weight loss as the mechanism through which you learn how to reparent yourself. Because you have to take care of yourself physically and get your needs met. You have to take care of yourself emotionally and get your needs met. And if you are taking care of yourself consciously and mindfully in a relationship with yourself, now we're in the spiritual dimension. This is a spiritual journey. So ultimately, the point here is whether you choose to fight against or work with your system is entirely up to you. And now, having said all of that, I also want to sidebar a little bit. It's not much of a sidebar, but like a related comment that I want to make that I also feel I feel a little bit nervous about, because it's like another one of those times where I'm like, I don't want to ruffle any feathers or rock the boat or what, but you know what? I have a belief, and I believe what I believe, and I feel what I feel, and I'm going to bravely share it. I have feelings about Overeaters Anonymous, and they feel important as I have a conversation with you about power. So the reason I'm like, I don't want to, because listen, as is always, always true, you find what works for you. You are the expert on you. You have agency and you do you, okay? If something works for you, run with it. This is a personal belief and a personal opinion that I'm going to share. One of my issues, I actually have many issues with OA, but one of my issues with OA, and again, if you are someone, and I've worked with people who are like, OA is the best thing that ever happened to me, great. I love that for you, and I want that to be part of your journey. But here's the deal. One of the things that I don't like about OA, or I just don't agree with, it's not ideologically aligned with where I'm coming from, is, as is true with the other 12-step programs, the first step is I am powerless. So, right, if we're looking at Alcoholics Anonymous, step 1 of the 12 steps is I am powerless over alcohol. If, for example, we're looking at CODA, Codependence Anonymous, I am powerless over other people. But there's all sorts of, these programs and communities now that start with step 1 is powerlessness. And my belief is we are talking about becoming, quote unquote, addicted to the substance on which we survive. And that's complicated. And I believe we only make things more complex by trying to fit our relationship to food and eating into pre-existing frameworks that work for other substances like drugs and alcohol, because it isn't like anything else. It's food, and it needs to be treated differently. It doesn't need the same 12-step program that works for other things where you can practice abstinence. I've had this conversation so many times. The thing that is tricky about a relationship with food that doesn't feel good, whether you feel like you're addicted to food or not, whatever it is, the trickiest thing about it is that there is no abstinence. You don't have the option of opting out. You don't have the option of just saying no. You can't. You literally cannot live the rest of your life practicing abstinence. And so with all these other substances and behaviors, if the first step is I am powerless, and then it leads to abstinence, well, okay, those things can go hand in hand. But how are we supposed to navigate the belief that we are powerless around food, but we have to be in relationship with it multiple times a day, every single day of our life just to survive? And I'm powerless over this? Hell no. I mean, I'm sorry, but no, it doesn't work for me, because how is it supposed to? How is that? I mean, to me, I do all of this because because to me it feels empowering to move through this stuff and heal and grow and sometimes struggle with it, but it's empowering. It leads to growth and evolution and development and alignment. And so if it all starts with the root of I am powerless, I just can't get on board with that. And so and the reason that I feel so passionate about it is because of what I've seen it do to the people that I've worked with. The effect that it's had on our beliefs about ourselves and our perception of ourselves. And there's a part of me, almost like the advocate in me, coming from a place of I want to protect the people that I work with. I want to protect the people that I love. And this message that they are powerless feels harmful to them. And I don't want that for them. I don't want that for us. So this is what I'm suggesting, is that we have some power, but we don't have all of it. So again, it's tricky if we're used to black and white thinking, all or nothing thinking, but to be in this dance, in this balance and harmony where, again, I take a step and my body responds, and this kind of energy of working together and collaboration, we can't believe that we have total control, like I said last time, because then we'll never get to collaboration. But we also can't believe that we're powerless, because then we're not even engaging in the conversation. We're trying to opt out. We're trying to abstain, and there is no abstinence here. And so that was in part my motivation for breaking down, this is where you have power, this is where you don't have power, because then we can start to be like, okay, what can I do differently? And what does it look like for me from this place to take action to alleviate suffering with fierce self-compassion, knowing that there are boundaries and there are limitations. So I can take action, but within a realistic framework. And the last thing that I'll say about that for now is I think about the other reason that this belief system of powerlessness doesn't work, and I think also does quite a bit of harm, is because there's a learned helplessness about it. Especially if you grew up with the influence of OA, or you have been in it for a long time or something like that, is, in my experience, my belief is that there's the result of buying into a paradigm that says you are powerless is there is like a learned helplessness to it. And what that means is, I looked up the definition so I could read it to you. Learned helplessness is a psychological state where a person believes they are powerless to change a negative situation after repeated failures, leading them to give up trying even when control becomes possible, often resulting in low motivation, low self-esteem, and depression. And then it goes on to say, it stems from uncontrollable stressors and manifests as passivity, a conviction of incompetence, a failure to act, even in new situations where escape or change is feasible. So think about what this means and potentially how relatable this is in our relationship with food and our bodies, and especially intentional weight loss and dieting. So you can probably tell here, it's not just if you have the indoctrination of Overeaters Anonymous, but in general, if you try something over and over and over again, and you experience the negative situation of repeated failures, and then we believe that we are not possible, we don't have control, we have low motivation, low self-esteem, depression, and it shows up as incompetence, failure to act, and most importantly, I think, even in new situations where escape or change is feasible. And so this is what I'm noticing over and over again, is that there is the belief that we have no power, so that even when it becomes possible and there are ways out and there are ways to change, fierce self-compassion, taking action to alleviate suffering, it's all about change and making change and being the change. But if you don't believe that you have any power to do anything because of the past experiences or what you've been taught to believe about yourself and your relationship with food, that's going to get in the way. And the last point about this that I'm going to make right now is that I do think there is a time and place for the idea of powerlessness and not having control. Because especially if you are someone who struggles with food and you feel out of control around food, and the only thing that ever made sense to you is to say, I'm an addict and I just have to abstain from sugar, for example. Like, I just can't do it. If I am powerless is the only thing that ever made sense of your relationship with food to you, here's what I want to offer you. The way that I see it and understand it is, again, it's not that you have all the power and it's not that you have none of the power. But what you're actually powerless over is the human condition. You have no power or control over the fact that you are a spiritual being having a physical experience with an animal brain in a social context surviving on food. You have no control over that. You are powerless around that. And what that means specifically as it relates to your relationship with food, but also any of the substances and behaviors that you use to cope, because that's the thing. It's not about the alcohol. It's not about the drugs. It's not about the gambling. It's not about the sex. It's not about the whatever. It's not about any of that stuff. It's about the powerlessness underneath all of it. It's really about the fact that we are powerless around the human condition that then sometimes has us turn to food. But it's not about food. It's about the fact that we can't control life, and we can't control emotions, and we can't control being a spiritual, energetic, intuitive being. And sometimes that results in us turning to food to manage and cope with that. But again, it's not about the food. So I think it's important to understand that we are powerless around the nature of being a human. As I started this episode with saying, we have to surrender to our nature. And once we've done that, now we can start to navigate food and other substances in a very different way. But if we believe that we have control over what it is to be a human, and then we are powerless around food, to me, that's backwards. We're powerless around the human condition, but we can exercise some control when it comes to food. Control, discipline, restraint, willpower, whatever. We can talk about all. We're going to talk about all of that. But the whole point is, I want it to be clear that there is a component of this that is, we have to acknowledge our powerlessness. We have to acknowledge where we don't have control. And to me, it's the greater mind, body, soul system we don't have control over. And the food is just, again, kind of the symptom of that. So the good news, and potentially somewhat scary news, but also maybe very exciting news, is that you have power. You are not powerless. And I think, to kind of leave it there, because what I will end with is just an invitation for you to think about what this means. What does this mean for you? You don't have total control, but you do have some control. You're not powerless over food, but you're powerless over the nature of being a human. What does this mean for you? And I'll give you a little hint. That is, I had a conversation like this recently with a client of mine where it was like, okay, well, where do you have power? Where do you have control? And where do you not? That's a good exercise to do. But beyond that, I think the biggest impact that this can make is going back again to the relationship you have with yourself. That is, where I believe you have the most power is on the inside. The way that you talk to yourself, the way that you treat yourself, the way that you are willing or not willing to be present with yourself. All of the way, tender self-compassion, fierce self-compassion, the way that you are in relationship with yourself, you have power over. Nobody else has power over that. And so if you can think about what this means in terms of being on your own team, psyching yourself up, feeling your feelings, being willing to be in your human experience as it is, if you can start thinking about that, now you get to show up. And this is the stuff that I get so geeked about, because it's like, you have power. You have so much power to free yourself, to heal yourself. And if the biggest issue getting in the way of you healing and recovering and thriving is the belief that you are powerless due to learned helplessness because of all the dieting that was never going to work to begin with because of the brain science, I mean, this is very exciting. Because you do not have to stay where you are. You do not have to be stuck. Your relationship with food and your body does not have to feel like this. But you first have to know that your power is what shifts it. And I always think about, with great power comes great responsibility. And with great responsibility comes great power. So when you show up, when you actually show up and you realize that you are no longer the child, no one is taking care of you, no one's going to come and do this for you, that you're also actually the parent, right? Now we have power, and there's a lot we could do with it. So all in all, I would love for you to consider this your permission slip to release your limiting beliefs. I will say that I think I am powerless around food is nothing more than a limiting belief. because you're not powerless around food. So you have permission to tap into your power, or just like experiment a little bit with considering what it might be like if you felt empowered, or if you felt like you were not powerless. If you knew that there was a part of you or a sense that got habituated into learned helplessness, I'm imagining, just kind of like coming over and tapping you on the shoulder and saying, hey, look, we found your power. You don't have to leave that behind. You don't have to live the rest of your life believing that you don't have that. It's right here. It's always been here. And again, I think all of this is still groundwork and foundation for integrating fierce self-compassion. You can't practice fierce self-compassion if you believe you have no power. If you believe that you can't change anything or do anything, how are you supposed to take action to alleviate your suffering? So we have to know we are powerful. And this is where, like, I was thinking about this the other day. I said this to someone, the quote that our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. This, because we are powerful beyond measure. So anyway, I am going to leave it there because I've been talking for over an hour already. So those are the follow-up thoughts that I had that I really wanted to include. And instead of promising you what the next episode is going to sound like, at this point, I promise that I will be back with another episode. I promise to continue this series, but I cannot promise you what it's going to sound like at this point because it all is really coming together in real time. So, all right. We did it. I did it. And now it's, at least on my count, 1 hour, 11 minutes. So that's another little nod I'm just going to take to say this is it. This is it for now. I hope this resonates. I hope you enjoy this. Please keep me posted. Please let me know. Any questions? Send them to me, lisaschlossberg@gmail.com. Keep listening. Keep following along. Keep being in touch. And know that I love you so very, very much. I will see you next week. Mwah.